right. Hello, good afternoon, students. This video is Dr. Harris explains principle 1 of the enduring principles of learning. Okay, and principle 1 is joint productive activity, JPA. Okay, so we're going to use this principle as we look at teaching and learning. And when we evaluate teaching practice, we're trying to say, okay, we know that we need high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, and high levels of criticality. So what does that look like translated into practice? And the eight principles of enduring learning are important because they are the way that we get to realizing those three principles of exemplary teaching. These are the things that teachers do, the teachers who succeed with the students that other teachers continue to fail with. Okay, that's why we have that leaking educational pipeline. But there have always been teachers who have been successful even with the kids that are seeing, quote, the toughest. Okay, so today we are focusing on principle 1. I'm going to share my screen with you. And principle 1 says joint productive activity, teacher and students producing together. This is about teacher facilitating learning through joint productive activity among teacher and students. The teacher and a small group of students collaborate on a shared project. So sometimes when I have seen future teachers and teacher pre-service teacher education students analyze videotapes of teaching, they often will label something as principle 1, and it's not principle 1 because what are they creating? You have to actually be creating something. It can be a dance, so it doesn't have to be something concrete as far as like building using sugar cubes to build something. That would be a project for sure, but it doesn't have to be concrete like that. It could be something like harmony, creating a harmony. It could be creating a rhythm. That could be something, but something has to be created. If they're not working on creating something together, then it's not joint productive activity. Okay, so let's just take a look at what Dr. Timont says about joint productive activity. She says, if learning is social and teaching is assisting, then collaboration is a natural part of learning. By sharing ownership of a task and its products, students are able to receive the type of support they need to accomplish more than they would on their own. They witness skills and strategies employed by collaborators and develop confidence in their own collaboration skills. So they get pretty excited about being able to contribute and make a meaningful contribution. Successful collaboration requires interaction and communication. Now, this is really important because a lot of times in classrooms, the teacher is doing most of the talking. Now, I know I have to always work on this. I'm a talker. I like to talk, and I talk a lot. And so, but if teacher is the only one talking, then you don't have as much student engagement as is helpful. So you think about it, if people are listening, that is receptive, right? It's receptive. I'm receiving whatever you're telling me, or I'm listening to some music. I'm receiving it. That's receptive. If it's productive, then I'm producing it and sharing it. So when teacher is talking, which, sometimes teachers do have to talk, as in instructional conversation, we're teaching through conversation. Um, that there's a time and a place for that. And if you look at the ratio of how much time teachers talk, especially when you have learners who are acquiring English as a second language, this can be a real problem because the way that you learn language is not only receptively by hearing it and processing it and thinking about it, but also productively, like speaking it, writing it, painting it, some sort of a production. So you can see why joint productive activity is so important here, because it's not the student just doing something on their own and you say, oh, well, that's a pretty good try, but actually teacher can be part of that as well. And so they benefit, students benefit from teacher participating because teacher is more expert at the skill, and they see how the teacher puts things together and enacts it. So the teacher might be doing a think aloud, like how they are creating this. And then look at that, you have instructional conversation happening while you're involved in joint productive activity. So these things aren't super clear cut as far as what each one is, but what is the focus? So the focus in joint productive activity is that something is being created amongst teacher and students, or even students. They have to be producing something. So if you don't see something being produced, then that's not joint productive activity. Okay. So the interaction and collaboration and communication is super important, particularly here as you're having students learn to use language and communicate and make their thoughts and feelings heard, share it with others in appropriate ways. Okay, so collaboration can be most fruitful when when there are differences in the skill levels of collaborators. Students can derive great benefits from working with peers in heterogeneous groups and having their teacher become a full participant. Okay, so sometimes people will be worried. They'll say, well, so and so is really advanced at that. And so if I partner them up in a heterogeneous group where there's a lot of skill levels, then my really expert student at this is just going to be bored. But I promise you that is not the case, because to be able to teach something, you have to know it at a higher level, and that takes a different skill set. So even though a student might be really expert at, like, say, story problem solving, to be able to articulate it and share it with other people around them, that takes a skill level that is requiring them to be growing and pushed also. So the so-called expert students, they do not get a free ride when you have heterogeneous groupings of skill levels. And the students who are the ones who might seen as the less expert, they're not getting a free ride either, because to be able to get the project done requires everyone's participation. So you do have to work on things, like as a teacher, you have to set up expectations. Sometimes girls will want to they might have gotten a message that it's cute to kind of pull back and not be as fully engaged, and you have to let the girls know, no, you do need to participate, whether we're creating a diagram of frog guts or whatever it is, you need to participate. And at the same time, there's times when boys are trying to maybe impress the girls, or there's different issues of masculinity, and perhaps they are internalizing this idea that girls and women should be seen and not heard so much, and so they'll be speaking, taking up too much airtime. So you do have to kind of work on those kind of setting the getting students used to working in a group dynamic, and that's part of joint productive activity. Okay, so these this handout here that we have is super helpful as far as you need this and need to know what each of these principles are so that you can apply them as you finish your school practicum project where you're evaluating videos of teachers teaching. Okay, so I'm going to minimize that right now and pull up a video for you. And I want you to look at the video and see if you can identify where joint productive activity is happening.
So today, the students are having an authentic learning experience by building puzzles together. They're comparing two variables, time, and then how many puzzle pieces that they were able to connect. At the end of given time intervals, they'll then gather their data to create a scatter plot and construct a linear regression that best represents their data and can make judgments based off of it.
Okay, so did you catch what the joint productive activity was? In this case, the teacher is not directly involved. We saw the students working together, but they were creating a puzzle and they had a particular purpose that was tied to their math class in putting this puzzle together. So they were creating something and it required interaction and it required collaboration. So that's definitely joint productive activity. As I look at our enduring principles, I would say that this activity also meets our principle number 4, which is challenging activities, teaching complex thinking. This is not a lower level on Bloom's taxonomy where it's just recall or memorization, spitting back some facts. They're actually having to generate knowledge and data and then apply it and draw some conclusions. So this is very much higher order thinking skills. So do you see how you can have more than one principle in the same lesson? You might not have every principle in every lesson. That's probably not likely. Sometimes you'll focus on maybe student directed activity where you're at the end of a unit, and maybe at the beginning of a unit you're doing a lot of modeling for the students. So that's principle 7 as compared to principle 8, which is student directed activity. You can always use principle 3 with contextualization, where you're taking things and putting it in context. That's what contextualization means. So if it has to do with science, you would want them to actually know how to use a microscope. And, so there you have language and literacy development, because you have to learn the words about for using a microscope, right? And the contextualization is happening because when we're studying cells, like a microscope is part of doing that goes in the context of it. So whatever the activity is, you want it to be authentic and realistic, and you're going to bring that in. So excuse me, if it's like farming animals or something like that, you might have pictures of it because you can't bring a cow in, right? And so you're just thinking about ways to make it as contextually similar to the situation as possible, which helps students who are acquiring English as a second language. And then you think about English language proficiency. You are still developing your own language proficiency, even if you're a primary speaker of English, when you are in grade school and high school. And, I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. I hope that I'm always acquiring more proficiency in English, more vocabulary, more in-depth understanding of language and how it can be used as a tool. So, that all comes together there. Let me play just a little bit more of
What I
it.
like about this class is that she's teaching the basics, and then we get to help figure out the details to it. And it really helps me like understand the material and then memorize it when it comes to tests and using it later on.
Wow, that's interesting, right? So she talked about principle 8, self-directed activity 2. They had some choices in what they were doing with joint productive activity. So you can see quite a few of the principles were there in this lesson. But the main focus of the lesson was joint productive activity. And it's linked to the state core standards because they're doing algebra and different mathematical concepts. So do you see how that's linking lesson planning to the core curriculum and using these principles of enduring learning? So definitely that's about it's about high levels of academic achievement for sure there, right? And I would say it's definitely about criticality at also in terms of you have the historically girls and minoritized students don't have as much access to STEM, to math, science, engineering, technology. So that these populations that are often kept out of and have less access to quality instruction in this, that they are participating in that. That's definitely a focus on criticality. And I haven't seen too much more about cultural competence in there, but I do feel like, learning to talk like a mathematician, and that is definitely a form of social capital that's being developed there, which you definitely want students to be able to walk in more than one world, right? So they should be able to think about themselves as mathematicians. Okay, so you can watch the rest of that one on your own. Let's see if we can look at this next one and see if we can find any joint productive activity. Oops. I guess I gotta push it back. Okay, here we go.
I have snakes. I have snakes. This. And there's windows that go in rivers. Some forest that walk red and bears. Not bears too. I could get the honey from the bees and the trees. Rocks and sunlight and water from
So this would be.
Could you hear that okay? That was the children were talking about bears and hibernation and what they eat. And so would this fit? They're working together, right? Would this be an example of joint productive activity? What do you think? My thought is no, because they are each filling out their own worksheet here. So I don't see a product that they're creating together. They're not creating something. I think this could be turned into a joint productive activity. Maybe in the next lesson they're going to have to take the content that they learned here on these in this packet that they're discussing and have to create something, I could see that becoming a joint productive activity. But right here, I see collaboration for sure. And I see a lot of language and literacy development as far as principle 2, but even I wouldn't put it as principle 2 as language and literacy development, just because the teacher is not involved in that. So you know, in the sense that they are discussing and dialoguing and using their vocabulary and learning to talk like biologists and zoologists, that's definitely language and literacy development, right? They're using language in very precise ways, and the more that they practice that language of talking like a zoologist, talking like a biologist, that is developing their language and literacy skills, right? So I wouldn't completely rule it out as either principle 1 or principle 2, but it doesn't fit fully into those. So I like it in the sense that the children are fully engaged and they're definitely developing and practicing their language and their literacy, as far as they're becoming literate in the language of zoologists, the language of biologists, that kind of literacy, not just simply decoding words. And so that is highly valuable. You always want learners to have opportunities where they can share, they can talk. It should not be that they're constantly just listening. Okay. So that would be my thought on that one. And so as you are filling out your framework and you are applying your framework to analyzing videos, you're going to want to do that same thing. You know, talk about how something might fit or not fit into a particular principle and why you think it's that. And if it is not there, then, like, for example, criticality. If I was going to be bringing criticality into this lesson, I might want to talk about how the environment and the climate changes is making you know, certain species of plants and animals have to move to higher elevations to stay cool enough for the way that their bodies and forms and life processes are made, right? So that's kind of looking at those inequities. So I could bring criticality into that, which would definitely be about a challenging activity and a critical stance in there. And so, and maybe if I gave students choices about, it doesn't have to be about bears, it could be about mountain goats, mountain lions. You know, I could have some student directed activities in there too. Okay. Alrighty. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen and post this video for you.